Hello again, everybody. This is Brian Baugh, creator of Wulf and Batsy, back with another issue commentary. This time for issue 3, the first chapter of the Bizarre Experiments story arc. This cover was drawn in 2021, I believe, recreating one of my favorite scenes from the entire series, with Wulf and Batsy in a graveyard, and Batsy is perched on a gravestone, telling ghost stories to the living dead. The title page is the original version of this same concept, drawn way back in, look at that date, the year 2000, 23 years ago, can you believe it? The weird thing about the Bizarre Experiment story, well, there's a lot of weird things about the Bizarre Experiment story, but one of the first weird things about it is that it was actually the very first Wulf and Batsy story I came up with, after I first created the characters way back in 2000. I thought, okay, I've got my werewolf, my vampire, what am I going to do with these guys? And my very first thought was, let's throw them into an adventure with zombies. And just hand wrote the first draft of the very first story, which was basically the rough plot of Bizarre Experiments. Sort of different. A lot of the details would change as I went on, but the basic skeleton of the story was there in that first handwritten document. Okay, here's issue 1, remember? I'd already done this drawing of the two of them together, and I just fell in love with them, and I immediately wanted to draw a story about them. So this was like the very next drawing I did. To me, zombies are one of the funnest monsters to draw because they can literally look like anything. I mean, here's a rotted guy. Here's a guy missing his eye. There's a melting guy with both eyes, but one of them is dripping out. And I love this guy just draped in cobwebs with all the little spiders hanging down. And then, of course, here's our star zombie, Bill Bucklebones. And I did this image, and these first couple pages of Batsy kind of zipping in this very weird ghostly way and talking to Wulf, who's still outside the gate, and she says, just hop over, which he does. And I got this far in and I just started to think, is this too much for the very first story, you know? I need a more proper introduction to these characters, and that's when I kind of backed off and got responsible and wrote the story that would become We Have No Home, a proper introduction where Wulf and Batsy, my werewolf and vampire, truly are the only monsters. So we're easing into the fantasy a little bit before we start jumping in with living corpses and mad scientists and mutants and all these other things. So Wulf and Batsy have entered this graveyard. Dawn is approaching, and they're just looking for a place to bed down and rest in a nice comfy grave. But all this activity has disturbed the sleep of the dead. So they are rising from their graves, and they're not too happy about this situation. They're not really looking for visitors. And Wulf and Batsy, who had no bad intentions, are a little surprised to find themselves confronted by this legion of the living dead. But just as they're about to leave, Batsy spots something. She says, look, it's a house. So then we cut to this wide-shot splash page where we see what Batsy was pointing at, and it's this very strange old house high on the hill. Probably just about the weirdest, most uninviting place imaginable. But Batsy's a vampire, so she says, that looks like a nice place to stay for a while. Bill Bucklebones immediately springs into action. All of a sudden, he's Mr. Nice Guy. He's giving them a warning. He says, that's Zagzog Mansion, the home of the most demented scientist in Ohio, Professor Von Zagzog. Batsy is naturally shocked at this horrifying name. Professor Von Zagzog? I've never heard of him. Who is he? Oh, he's a horrible man. Every other night he comes down here and steals corpses. So, realizing that they're all undead and they're all kind of in the same mess, Bill Bucklebones and his zombie friends offer to let Wulf and Batsy stay here for the following day. Got a story behind this guy. I was at the bookstore and I saw a book of crime scene photographs, real crime scene photographs, and there was a photo in there of a stabbing victim, a guy who had been stabbed so many times and so badly by a big knife like this with a huge blade where it had taken out one of his eyes, and one of the knife strikes had hit him right in the two front teeth and knocked them out. I found that pretty nightmarish, and I had to draw a character like that. Because, hey, that's how I cope with these things. If I'm going to have nightmares, I'm going to make sure you guys have them too. I like this guy who's just vomiting worms. Another guy eating rats. And this is the little zombie girl from Night of the Living Dead. The one who kills her mother with the garden trowel. See, there's the garden trowel right there. One of my weird tendencies as a guy who both writes and draws my comics, a lot of times I will think up weird little jokes in the page sketches. Because when I write the story, a lot of times it's just a written description of the basic plot, just the basic sequence of events. But when I get into sketching my pages, that's when I tend to think in terms of real character personality. Okay, that's the plot. That's what's supposed to happen. But what would this character do in that moment, in those circumstances? And at this point in this story, I remember I was drawing the page sketches, and it just occurred to me that we haven't seen Batsy, who is a vampire, drink any blood yet. So just take care of that, get that out of the way. She happens to notice this one zombie who's eating the rats, and she says, "Excuse me." And he goes, "Huh?" And she says, "Would you happen to have another one of those?" So he gives her one, and she sucks the rat's blood. So it sort of gets the whole issue of her needing to drink some blood for her nourishment out of the way, and it's also kind of a fun little joke that sort of breaks up the story. I particularly like this drawing of Bill Bucklebones here, where he's got all the worms crawling between his finger bones. He says, "We'd love to hear the story of your travels." Batsy says, "You want to hear a story? I'll tell you a story. Gather around." And then we cut to this humorous image of the zombies all sitting around while Batsy sits on a gravestone telling them a ghost story. This page was drawn very early, and it was one of those moments that just, for some reason, just grabbed me, and I just jumped right in and drew this illustration. Even before I drew some of the pages that went previously, I just saw this image in my mind, and I just wanted to draw it. Sometimes that happens, like an idea in a written plot will just jump out at me, and I just pictured it in my head, and I got to draw it right then and there. But this has always been one of my all-time favorite moments from Wulf and Batsy. Overall, is just this image of her sitting on the gravestone. This moment sort of solidified Batsy's personality in my mind, too, at this very, very early stage, after having just dreamt up this whole concept. Something about her being a monster and them being monsters. And they're real monsters. They mean it. You know, she drinks blood. They eat flesh. Wulf kills. You know, they're the legit monsters. But there's this... somehow there's this sort of endearing side to them. I don't know, it's hard to explain. The zombies react. I kind of like this guy with the bullet hole in his forehead. We know how he died. And then they point, and they all run away. Batsy says, "Hey, I haven't even gotten to the scary part yet." And then they all turn around and look behind them. The arrival of Professor von Zagzog. I had a lot of fun with this drawing here. With the big long shadows that look like points or arrows. These shapes also kind of remind me of devil tails, which is one of those weird abstract shapes that sort of gives me the creeps. I think because when I was a kid, that was when the Amityville Horror came out, and I remember when I was little, my mom bought the book, and I remember seeing the cover, and the title logo had the little devil tail curling around, and it just screamed evil to me as a little kid. So something about that abstract shape just kind of gives me the creeps, but from that childhood memory. But of course the shadows don't really make sense, because technically there should be these crossbars here too, but then that would ruin the arrow devil tail effect, wouldn't it? So I didn't put them in. But I definitely felt that Professor Von Zagzog needed a grand entrance, being the major villain of this story arc, and, you know, in the Wulf and Batsy saga overall, he looms large. And even in these next few panels, I was trying to create a sense that the glow of the lantern is intensely bright, and it's casting these really extreme light and dark shadows. You still can't really see quite what he looks like, trying to keep him a little bit mysterious. I always really like this panel with Batsy. I think she looks really good there. Oh, Wulf, look at these scaredy cats. Some zombies you guys are, shivering in your crypts, afraid of one human. Here's a headless corpse, because you got to have at least one headless zombie, right? And this character, in the issue 1 commentary video, I mentioned my friend Dave Hartman and how he and I used to make little short homemade horror movies with our video camera when we were in college in the early 1990s. One of the movies that we made back then we called it the Yancey Lloyd Sergio Honduras Zombie Trilogy. Big pretentious title for these little short 10-minute horror movies. But anyway, in that little series of homemade horror movies, I actually played a living corpse who came back from the dead for revenge and proceeded to kill, Dave and my buddy Mike and all of our friends. So this was that character. This was the living corpse of Yancey Lloyd Sergio Honduras, back from the dead. That's kind of what my costume looked like in that movie, with the cheap rubber Halloween corpse mask. So that's a little homage to our art school horror movies. And speaking of art school and Dave Hartman, here's another homage to Dave right here. This is his comic book character, Wright. When we were in art school, actually right after we got out of art school, we were trying to make comic books together and try to break in as indie comic creators way back then. And we kind of failed, but we both had our own comics that we did back then. And Dave's comic was called Wright, and it was about this character who was sort of sort of a goofy Frankenstein superhero type character. Quite hilarious. So I had to put him in there. I just love drawing zombies because you can sort of suggest all the different ways they all got killed. I love this guy. Looks like he got his head blasted out with a shotgun. Of course, this guy. Gee, I wonder how he died. I think the evidence is still there. Here's a kind of a biker dude. I assume he got killed in a motorcycle crash where his face must have hit the concrete and both of his eyeballs fell out. Just a guess. And Bill Bucklebones over here is saying, you don't understand. That's Professor Von Zagzog. He's come to take one of us away. For this panel, I just wanted to reestablish the geography of this whole scene, just to make it clear as I could for the reader exactly where everybody is. So, here's Wulf and Batsy. It's kind of funny, like Batsy's like this small vampire girl and she's hiding behind this little tombstone. And then Wulf is like hulking behind her. He's way too big to hide behind this little tombstone, but I don't know. That's funny to me. And now here we have a little sequence that kind of really for the first time clarifies the difference between Wulf and Batsy's personalities. Batsy is a little people person. Even though she's a vampire, even though she sucks blood and all that stuff, she kind of has this spirit to her where she likes to help people in need. Or, zombies in need. But she says, we got to do something, Wulf. Whereas on the other hand, Wulf is much more selfish, and he is not in favor of this idea at all. His idea is the more we mind our own business, the less trouble we get into. Always like this drawing of Batsy, too. I think she looks real cute there. And he's just fed up with her and her silly plans to help everybody. But she loses her temper and she says, "Don't you growl at me, mister. We both saw what that mean old man did. That makes it our problem. So stop being so selfish. These zombies need our help. We'll find food later." So this is another subplot in the story, is that part of the reason Wulf is in such a bad mood is that he's actually hungry. This is a setup for something that doesn't even really pay off until the end of issue 6. And we're only on issue 3 here. But it's an important point that when Wulf's werewolf hunger starts to take over, it's like a shark having a feeding frenzy. It makes him completely oblivious to everything else going on. And all he can focus on is his appetite, his insatiable hunger for flesh and blood. So Batsy uses the classic response of, "Fine, you know what, fine. You just stay here and pout about it, and I'll just go deal with this by myself." Which she knows Wulf would never let her do. She goes striding down the hill to address the zombies. You'll have to forgive me. I'm an incurable leg man. Here they are. I love this guy. That's what I consider to be a very typical Brian zombie. That's the way I like to draw him. Just those mean, arched eye socket shapes to kind of create a frown. The beaming, bulging eyeballs and teeth. I just love to draw skull teeth and the crazy hair. I love this guy too with the melting face, the flesh just sliding right off. That guy's fun. Kind of like, "Brr." Oh, and this guy. Don't forget him. I think this might be his brain matter. He might be one of those corpses whose brain has completely liquefied inside his skull and now it's just pouring out of his nose. I could be wrong, but I think that's what's going on there. His hair was well combed when his body was being prepared for his funeral. And this guy has a nice tie. But that one's my favorite. Here's another one of those weird jokes that it's a very character-based thing that, again, came up in the page sketches, not really the written story. But she says, he's disturbed your resting place, and now he must suffer the revenge of the dead. Who's with me? And all these corpses are just kind of like, Come on, guys. Aren't there any volunteers? Won't you rise up and defend your eternal slumber? Well, you see, we're all kind of undead and not really up for much excitement. This guy, when he got killed, I think somebody hit him in the head with a chainsaw and it just sawed right down across his face and the tongue just flopped out through the hole in the side of where his cheek used to be. And then I just wanted to have this big, glorious, gratuitous, crowded shot with all these corpses just surrounding her as they're all trying to decide what to do. This guy's fun. Just a mouthful of worms. And they're coming out the top of his cranium too, so you can only imagine that his head is just filled with worms. Masses of worms that just got in there and ate his cerebrum. And now they're just coming out of his mouth. And his ears. This guy's just like half a face. Who knows what happened to him? I like this guy with the black goop just dripping down. It's always fun to draw vertebrae and rib cages and all these weird tangled arm muscles. All that gristle. Oh, and there's another drippy eyeball. And I just think this is a cute line for Batsy where she says, "So, I'm undead too, and I'm willing to try." She's such a sport. And finally, Bill Bucklebones looks around at his other friends, and he says, I'll go. Bill Bucklebones at your service. Batsy looks over to Wulf, and he very reluctantly nods in agreement. And they start up the hill toward Zagzog Mansion. Basically, they've arrived, and Batsy says, "Yes, and now time to infiltrate." And she thinks to herself, "I need a disguise, something that appears inconspicuous, non-threatening, innocent." And she does this weird transformation where her clothes transform from her vampire costume into these black swirls of fabric and into a schoolgirl outfit, which looks totally innocent. But she says, "You two go hide and keep watch, and when the time is right, I'll sneak you in the back door. And Wulf will get you some food, I promise." Keeping that subplot alive. So they leave her, and again, another fun little silhouette panel. I love silhouettes, and this is sort of a reverse silhouette. And then we go to this shot of Batsy alone, looking up at the mansion and considering what she's about to do. Anyway, Batsy's heading up to Zagzog's front door. I love the fact that Zagzog is such an egomaniac. He has to have his name on the door. But also, you got to have a nice big creepy spider in there and a Venus flytrap plant. They look good in a horror story. So she knocks on the door, and when the door opens, we see this guy. And Batsy is surprised. She was not expecting a guy who looked like that, with a burlap stitched sack over his head. So she's asking if he has a guest room where she can stay. And he just kind of looks back at her like he doesn't know what to say. And then he says, "You come inside. Me ask if okay." So Batsy enters this dark, spooky house. And there's another young lady already sitting in there. "I'm a reporter. The name's Blonda Speckles." Don't ask me where or how or why I came up with that name. All I knew was she's blonde with freckles. Her name's Blonda Speckles. Because that's how serious a writer I am. Again, I was very young and just having a lot of silly fun when I made this comic book. But I think that's part of its appeal. You know, I think when you're doing art and you're having fun doing it, I think that sort of translates to the reader somehow. She says, "I'm with the Epworth Ready Gazette, and I'm here to interview Professor Von Zagzog." Batsy says, "Wow, neat." "My name's Vicky Silk." Again, this is in the early days of working on Wulf and Batsy, and one of those kind of strange ideas that sort of came and went was the idea that in certain situations, Batsy might need an alias to pretend she's a normal human being, not a vampire. We cut to this wide shot with this very bizarro architecture. At this time, I was just sort of like, the heck with correct perspective. I'm just going to make this place look weird. And in an environment like this and in a story like this, I've got a perfect excuse to get away with something like that. Fun detail here, if you're an H.P. Lovecraft fan, there's a portrait on the wall of Zadok Allen, who was a character in The Shadow over Innsmouth. which I have to say is my all-time favorite Lovecraft story. Also on the wall, we have a portrait of Wit Zorgon, which was a character that, again, my buddy Dave Hartman played in one of our shot-on-video movies. Another mad scientist who apparently is also a friend of Professor von Zagzog. And this is where we start to get a sense of Blonda Speckle's personality, because she says, "From the looks of this house, I'm guessing Zagzog must be super rich. And super dreamy." There's no nice way to put it, folks. She's a gold digger. And all of a sudden, from the top of the stairs, Sludge! It's Professor von Zagzog himself. And Sludge answers, "Master, we have guests. Shall I let them stay?" And Zagzog, being the very inviting host that he is, hisses in disgust. "The reporter from that miserable newspaper and an unexpected guest. Both could be useful." And he heads back up the stairs. Blonda is slightly disappointed. She says, he's not quite as dreamy as I imagined. But he's still rich. Sludge says, "This way." And he leads Batsy and Blonda off to the guest rooms. And from the shadows, Zagzog is watching. "Yes, very useful indeed. One to reestablish my credibility with the public, and one to use in my experiments." Gee, which one do you think he could mean for either of those purposes? And it says, "To be continued." So that is the end of the first chapter of the Bizarre Experiment story. Very last page of the book, we have Captain Bloodclot's famous novelties. Giant rubber bats, automatic pistols with silencers, mutilate corpses at home, satisfy your dark morbid curiosity, great autopsy practice for young aspiring morticians, toy dinosaur skeletons. Oh, I like this one. Kissing lessons for the toothless. Just because all your teeth fell out doesn't mean your love life is over. Oh, speaking of the shadow over Innsmouth, here we have an ad for the Captain Bloodclot Travel Agency. Planning your next vacation getaway to Innsmouth, Massachusetts at the Gilman House Inn. Rooms are now available. And look at the wonderful sights you'll see when you go there. Inside back cover, we have an ad for Team Pun Fun, which is a really cool YouTube channel hosted by this troublemaker here. And look, Batsy's in the ad. Yes, that's right, folks. They were nice enough to have me on their show, and I did an interview with them. And so they advertised it here. Yep, there's me. Look at that serious, serious, serious artist face. So that does it for issue 3 of Wulf and Batsy, the first chapter of the Bizarre Experiment story arc. Let me know in the comments if you like these videos. They're fun to do, to go back through these issues and sort of talk about what was going on in my head as I made them. And next, coming up, oh, this is a good one. Issue 4, Chapter 2 of the Bizarre Experiment story arc, where you have Wulf being very cool and Batsy in a classic European horror movie style 1960s, 70s era diaphanous nightgown. Classic vampire cinema stuff. So, see you next time, and if you find that you can't sleep tonight because Wulf and Batsy is just too horrifying, just keep reminding yourself, it's only a comic book. It's only a comic book. Good night.
Whoa, what's out there?
Ooh.